The alley behind the 24-hour supermarket always felt like the backside of the world, the place where everything unwanted ended up. Old oil clung to the cracked concrete, banana peels sagged in broken crates, and a single street lamp buzzed above, its light blinking like a tired eye. Ethan Rowe, 34, dragged his broom in slow strokes, gravel crunching under his work boots. His shift as the night security guard had technically ended an hour ago, but he stayed to clean because it made him feel useful. It was easier to sweep than to go back to an apartment that stayed too quiet for too long. He lifted another flattened box and heaved it into the green dumpster. It landed with a hollow thud. Then beneath that, there was something else. A rustle. The soft scrape of cardboard against metal. Ethan paused, shoulders tensing. He let the broom handle rest against his hip and unclipped the flashlight from his belt. The night seemed to press closer as he stepped forward. When he leaned over the edge of the dumpster and flicked the light on, the beam caught a shape that didn't belong to trash. A child was crouched deep among the bags and boxes, her thin knees pulled to her chest as she dug frantically through a greasy fast food sack. Her arms were thin as bare branches in winter, her skin a grayish pale. A once yellow dress, now stained and torn, clung to her small frame. Her bare feet were red with cold and grime. Tangled dark hair fell over her face like a curtain. In one arm she clutched a stuffed bear, its fur matted and one plastic eye missing. With the other hand, she rifled through the trash with a desperate focus that made Ethan's throat tighten. Hunger changes the way people move, he thought. It makes every gesture sharp, urgent, afraid of being interrupted. "Hey," he said gently. The girl jerked, her head snapping up. Her eyes were huge in the beam of light, wide with animal panic. She tried to scramble backward, but her heels skidded on a slick wrapper. As she caught herself on the metal edge, her palm slammed into the rim of a rusted can. She exhaled a tiny sound, more breath than scream, and a thin red line of blood blossomed across her hand. "Don't move!" Ethan blurted, louder than he meant. "I'm not going to hurt you." "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice small and cracked. She cradled her injured hand against her chest, shrinking into the corner of the dumpster. Her gaze darted everywhere at once, like she was searching for exits that didn't exist. Above them, something shifted. Ethan's eyes flicked up just in time to see the length of iron pipe that had been leaning against the dumpster start to slide. Later, he would think about how quiet that moment was, just the scrape of metal, the soft intake of his own breath, before it gave way to speed. The pipe tumbled, aiming straight for the girl. "Hey!" Ethan threw himself forward. His ribs hit the dumpster's edge as he dove inside, grabbing her around the middle. The bear squashed between them as he twisted his body, pulling her clear. The pipe crashed against the metal wall where her head had been, the impact ringing through the alley like a gunshot. A second slower, and there would have been nothing any doctor could do. They toppled out together, landing hard on the damp concrete. Ethan held on until he felt her breathing, felt her trembling against his chest. Only then did he loosen his grip. She didn't fight him. She just clutched the bear tighter, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Up close, she seemed impossibly small, like someone had drawn her with lines that were too thin. "It's okay," he said, breathless. "You're safe now, I promise." Promises, he knew, were fragile things. But in the middle of a cold alley, with a child who had just almost been crushed in a dumpster, sometimes a fragile thing was all there was. He carried her inside through the back door, past stacked pallets and humming refrigerators, into the break room that smelled of old coffee and microwave dinners. The couch sagged in the middle. The fluorescent light flickered overhead, but it was warm. Ethan set her down gently, wrapped his heavy jacket around her shoulders, and grabbed a loaf of bread from the shelf, pouring warm water into a paper cup from the kettle he kept for long nights. She accepted the food cautiously, never releasing the bear. Each bite was tiny, measured, like she expected someone to yank it away. People who had gone without often ate like that. They were always ready to lose the thing they'd just been given. "Can you tell me your name?" Ethan asked softly as he sat beside her. She stared at the floor. "Do you have somewhere you're supposed to be? Parents? A family?" Silence stretched, heavy and thin. Then, almost too quiet to hear, she lifted the bear an inch and whispered, "His name is Captain Patches." Ethan let a small smile touch his face. "Captain Patches? That's a strong name. Nice to meet him." For a heartbeat, her eyes flicked up to his. There was still fear there, but underneath it, something else flickered. Wary curiosity, the smallest crack in the wall she'd built. He took a clean cloth from the first aid kit and knelt in front of her, gently taking her injured hand. She flinched, but she didn't pull away. "This might sting a little," he murmured. He talked the whole time. Simple things, what he was doing, how the disinfectant would clean the cut, how the bandage would keep it safe. He moved slowly, letting her watch each step. Trauma specialists often say that control is the first thing children lose and the last thing they get back. Ethan didn't know the research, but he understood the feeling. When he finished, her small palm was wrapped in a neat white bandage. She stared at it for a long moment, then looked up at him again. In that fragile gaze, in the way she seemed torn between bolting and staying, something settled hard in his chest. He didn't know who she was or what had driven her into a dumpster behind his store. He just knew she should never have been there alone. And tonight, at least, she wasn't. The break room settled into a thin, humming quiet. The vending machine rattled every few minutes, the old refrigerator clicked on and off, and the clock above the microwave ticked louder than it had any right to. The girl, still nameless except for the bear, had curled onto the couch. Ethan's jacket wrapped around her like a cocoon. Captain Patches sat between her arms, one ragged ear folded forward as if listening. Ethan stood near the door, his phone in his hand, thumb hovering over 3 numbers that glowed up at him. 911. He had always believed that when something was wrong, you called for help. That's what the posters said, what the announcements repeated in schools and grocery store aisles. If you see something, say something. But real life had a way of complicating slogans. "I need to call someone," he said quietly. "The police, they can help you." The word had barely left his mouth before everything in her changed. She bolted upright, eyes wide, breathing suddenly sharp and fast. "No!" Her voice cracked like dry wood. "No police, please, please, no!" She pressed herself into the corner of the couch, clutching the bear so tightly her knuckles whitened around the bandage. The terror in her face wasn't the kind you got from being scolded or grounded. It was deeper, older, the kind that lodges in a child's bones when something awful has already happened. Ethan's stomach twisted. Slowly, he set the phone on the table where she could see it wasn't in his hand anymore. He raised both palms, keeping his voice low. "Okay. No police, not tonight. You're safe here, I promise. No one's taking you anywhere you don't want to go." Her breathing stayed choppy for a while, but the wild look in her eyes softened by degrees. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past. Somewhere in the store, a refrigeration unit kicked on. Nights like this, Ethan thought, were the ones that stretched forever for people who couldn't sleep. The lonely, the hurting, the ones who kept the lights on while the world pretended everything was fine. He crossed to the supply closet, pulled out a small flashlight, and switched off the overhead light. The room sank into a gentle dark, broken only by the thin beam he swept across the ceiling tiles. "Want to hear a story?" he asked. She watched him quietly from the nest of his jacket. "This one's about a little girl who lived up there." He tilted the flashlight so the circle of light hovered above them like a tiny moon. On the moon itself, actually. She liked quiet places and hated bright rooms. Up there, she wore a dress made of starlight, and she had a brave bear named Captain Patches who could talk. Something shifted in her expression, confusion giving way to a faint, unwilling curiosity. "Every night," Ethan went on, "she looked down at the world and saw the people who stayed awake when everyone else slept. The lonely ones, the scared ones, the ones who swept alleyways and thought too much." He moved the light slow and steady, letting soft shapes dance on the walls. One night, the moon girl saw a boy who felt like the world had forgotten him. He was standing behind a grocery store, right by a dumpster, thinking about how dark things could get. So she climbed down on a beam of moonlight, because some people should never have to wait alone. The girl's eyes followed the light as it came to rest over her small form, bathing her in a pale glow. "Did she go back up?" she whispered. "Not yet," Ethan said. "She's still deciding. She might stay if the world down here is kind enough, if people keep their promises." Her shoulders relaxed a little. The jacket slipped from one side, and Ethan tucked it back around her, careful not to startle. Her eyelids drooped, still watching the shifting beam. Children's therapists sometimes use stories like this to reframe fear, to hand kids a new lens for their memories. Ethan didn't know the studies, but he knew that stories had gotten him through nights when grief sat on his chest and refused to move. As she finally drifted off, her breathing evening out, a different memory slid in beside the one he'd just created. Sirens, flashing lights, a car on its side, glass everywhere. His sister's shoes in the road, too small, too still. The ache that followed had never fully left. It had just learned to live inside him, quiet and heavy. Maybe that was why he was still here, in a fluorescent break room at 3 a.m, telling moon stories to a stranger who clung to a broken bear. At dawn, the sky outside turned the color of cold milk. Ethan washed her face gently at the sink, found a spare hoodie in the lost and found, and wrapped it around her shoulders. She walked beside him, hands swallowed in his, as they made their way 6 blocks to the nearest community clinic. Her steps were short, hesitating, but she didn't pull away. A nurse at the front desk looked up, her expression softening the moment she saw the bandage, the too big jacket, the wary eyes. "Come with me, sweetheart," she said, voice warm. The girl hesitated, then followed. A pediatrician checked her over carefully, pulse, reflexes, the cut on her palm. When he stepped into the hallway, his face was different, more alert, suddenly older. "I think I recognize her," he told Ethan. Her description matches an active Amber Alert, a child named Amelia Hart, missing for 2 years. The world seemed to narrow to the sound of his words. In the United States, those alerts flashed across phones and highway signs, piercing the quiet with shrill tones. People looked, worried for a moment, then life swept them back up. But the missing didn't move on just because everyone else did. "She might be the Hart heiress," the doctor added quietly. "We have to notify the police. This is big." Ethan swallowed. "I don't want money," he said. "I don't want my name in headlines. Just make sure she's safe." "You're not in trouble," the doctor assured him. "You did the right thing." Within an hour, the clinic filled with movement. Officers arrived, gentle but firm, speaking softly to Amelia. Amelia, he thought. Her name is Amelia. While they took fingerprints and photos, whispers ran along the halls. By afternoon, they were at a downtown precinct, in a waiting area that smelled of paper and old coffee. Amelia sat wrapped in a blanket beside a social worker, Captain Patches tucked under her chin. Ethan sat across from them, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles blanched. Doors opened and closed. Phones rang. Somewhere a news anchor's voice floated from a television in another room. Missing heiress, found alive. The kind of story people watched before bed, shaking their heads, telling themselves that maybe the world wasn't all bad. Then the double doors at the far end of the waiting room swung open. A woman hurried in, flanked by officers and a man in a tailored suit. Her coat was the kind expensive magazines like to photograph, but it hung crooked on her shoulders. Her hair, a pale gold, was pulled into a knot that had started to come apart. Her eyes scanned the room, wide and raw. Ethan didn't need anyone to tell him who she was. Some truths announced themselves without words. Amelia's mother had arrived. She moved like someone running through a dream, afraid that if she blinked, everything would vanish. Her heels clicked once, twice, then faltered when her gaze found the small figure on the plastic chair. Amelia. The girl looked up, mid-blink, blanket bunched at her chin, Captain Patches peeking out like a quiet witness. The woman's breath caught. Her entire frame folded in on itself with a single broken sound. "Amelia?" she whispered, the name cracking in the space between them. The room seemed to pause. Papers stopped shuffling. Conversations faded into a hush. The social worker leaned down, murmuring something soft in Amelia's ear. The child's eyes slid from the woman to the bear and back again. Confusion deepened into something like fear. There was no recognition. How could there be? 2 years is a lifetime when you're that small. The woman dropped to her knees, expensive coat pooling around her on the tile. "It's me, sweetheart. It's Mom," she said, tears spilling freely now. "I'm here. You're safe. I found you." Amelia shrank back an inch, one hand clutching the blanket tighter. That particular kind of distance, the space between a child and the person who loves them most, was almost unbearable to look at. Ethan felt it like a bruise deep in his chest. Trauma doesn't just steal time, he thought. It steals the path back. The social worker spoke again, this time more slowly. "Amelia, this is your mom. You've been away for a long time. You don't have to remember everything right now. You just have to know you're safe. Amelia's gaze drifted down to the bear, then to the woman's shaking hands. After a long moment, she slid off the chair, blanket trailing behind her. Her steps were careful, measured. She stopped just in front of the woman. The officers held their breath. Ethan did too. Instead of throwing her arms around her, Amelia did something smaller, stranger, and somehow more powerful. She lifted Captain Patches and gently placed him in her mother's lap. The woman, Elena Hart, heiress of a design empire, the face that had graced business magazines and charity galas, let out a shuddering breath. She wrapped her arms around the bear as if it were her child. Only then did Amelia lean forward, resting her head against Elena's shoulder, not quite hugging, not quite pulling away. The sound that left Elena's throat was part sob, part prayer, part animal howl of relief. It was the sound of someone who had lived in an endless night and just felt, for the first time, the edge of morning. Through the glass pane beside the hallway, Ethan watched and didn't move. This wasn't his moment. His part, he thought, was just to make sure they reached it. A reporter found him near the exit, already angling for a quote, a story to fill the evening news. "Mr. Rowe, is it true you discovered her? How did you know she was the Hart girl?" Microphones appeared like metal flowers. Cameras blinked red. Ethan lifted one hand, tired to the bone. "No comment," he said, then hesitated. "Just one question. Is she going to be okay?" An officer beside him nodded, voice quiet. "She has a chance now. That's more than she's had in a long time." It wasn't a guarantee, just a possibility. But sometimes, on long sleepless nights, possibility was the only thing that kept people going. Ethan stepped out into the cold air and let the station door close behind him. He didn't look back. He'd done what he could. The rest, he told himself, belonged to them. Morning came late to Ethan's apartment, filtered through thin curtains and the hum of traffic 3 floors below. The space was small but orderly. A worn couch, a second-hand bookshelf, a tiny table with one uneven leg he'd propped up with an old paperback. Everything had its place because control, he'd learned, could sometimes be rebuilt from little things. Stacked plates, folded shirts, swept floors. He was halfway through a bowl of oatmeal at the wobbly table when a knock sounded at the door. Not the sharp rhythm of a neighbor in a hurry, not the heavy bang of a landlord. Just 3 gentle taps, as if the person on the other side wasn't quite sure they should be there. Ethan opened the door and froze. Elena Hart stood in the hallway, not surrounded by officers or cameras this time. No tailored coat, no sharp heels. Just jeans, a soft cream sweater, sneakers that looked borrowed from some quieter life. Her golden hair was pulled back loosely, strands escaping around her face. Without the armor of her public image, she looked like what she was. A mother who'd been awake for too many nights. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, voice carefully steady. "I needed to thank you." Ethan stepped aside. "You're not interrupting." She stepped in, eyes taking in the room without judgment. They landed on the single-framed photograph on his shelf, a young girl with the same eyes as his, grinning at the camera, wind pushing her hair sideways. Elena's expression shifted, softening even more. "I didn't know what to bring," she said quietly. From her bag, she pulled out an envelope and held it out with trembling fingers. "This is just a small gesture. You found my daughter, you saved her, you changed everything." Inside, a check, an amount that would have fixed most of his practical problems. Rent for months, the dent in his car door, the medical bill he'd been ignoring. $10,000. To some families, a drop in the bucket. To Ethan, a miracle on paper. He stared at it for a moment, then slowly folded the envelope closed and offered it back. "I didn't do this for a reward," he said. "I did it because once I wished someone had been there for my sister like that. No headlines, just someone who wouldn't walk past." Elena swallowed, her gaze flicking to the photo again. "I'm sorry," she murmured. The apology wasn't about the check. It was something more human, a recognition of shared hurt. She tucked the envelope away, but didn't leave. Instead, she took a breath, bracing herself the way people do before saying something that matters. "Amelia talks about you constantly," she admitted. "She calls you the Moon Man. She keeps asking if you're coming back." Ethan's brows lifted despite himself. "She does?" Elena gave a small, almost shy smile. "Would you consider visiting? Just for a little while, this weekend maybe. I know it's strange, you're a stranger, but you're also—" She trailed off, searching for the right word. "You're someone she trusts, and right now, that's rare." There was a long, gentle pause. Somewhere in the building, a radio played an old love song softly through a thin wall. Life going on as it always did. "Yeah," Ethan said finally, the answer simple and true. "I'd like that." The Hart estate looked nothing like his building. When he arrived that weekend, parking his old car at the curb, he took in the tall iron gate, the manicured lawns, the columns that framed the front door like something out of a magazine. Money could build walls and fountains and high ceilings, he thought, but it couldn't rebuild a child's sense of safety overnight. He had barely raised his hand to knock when the door flew open. A small figure came barreling down the hallway, socks skidding on polished floors. "Mr. Ethan!" Amelia shouted, launching herself forward. He caught her, the force of her hug nearly knocking him backward. Captain Patches was squashed between them like a familiar, battered witness. In that moment, the distance between their worlds seemed to shrink to the size of a child's arms. From the hallway, Elena watched them, a different kind of light in her eyes. One that had nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with relief. From the hallway, Elena watched them, her blouse neat, her hair pinned up in the way the magazines liked, but her shoulders softer than before. "She's been asking about you since breakfast," she said, stepping closer. Since you left the station, really." They moved through this house together, past framed art and tall windows that let in the pale afternoon light. The kind of place that looked perfect in pictures and strangely echoing in person. Outside, the garden was almost too manicured. Hedges cut to precise shapes, stone paths laid in clean lines. But there was a swing set beneath a maple tree where someone had clearly tried to make space for childhood again. Amelia ran straight for the swing, Captain Patches tucked safely under her arm. She hopped up, legs pumping, hair flying as she moved. For the first time since the clinic, Ethan heard her laugh. A quick, bright sound that startled even her, like she'd forgotten she could make it. Elena and Ethan sat on a wooden bench a short distance away. For a while, neither of them spoke. The quiet was different here than in his apartment. It wasn't the absence of noise. It was the weight of everything not being said. "Everyone keeps asking about the company," Elena said at last, eyes following Amelia's arc through the air. "About the press, the board, the brand. They want statements, strategies." She shifted, folding her hands tightly in her lap. "No one asks if I'm sleeping, or if she wakes up screaming some nights." Ethan glanced at her profile, at the lines of exhaustion that no makeup could fully mask. "Are you sleeping?" he asked gently. Not as someone speaking to an heiress, but as someone who knew a little too much about bad dreams. She huffed a breath that was almost a laugh. "Not really," she admitted. "When she disappeared, I walked away from everything, meetings, events, the whole machine. I rented a little farmhouse hours from here, lived with silence and police updates that never brought news. Eventually, people stopped calling." Her voice grew quieter. "I stopped believing I'd ever get to hold her again. And now that she's here, it's like I'm afraid to breathe too deeply in case I scare her away." He didn't rush to fill the silence. He just let her words settle in the cool air between them. "You don't look at me like they do," Elena said unexpectedly. "Not like Elena Hart, the woman who failed to protect her child, or Elena Hart, the tragic headline. You just look." "That's because I see what they don't," Ethan replied. "Someone who's still here, still showing up. That counts." She blinked quickly, turning her gaze back to Amelia. The girl dragged her feet to slow the swing, then called out, "Mom, look how high I can go." Her voice carried across the garden, high and proud. Elena stood almost on instinct and walked toward her daughter, her posture softening as she did. Just before she reached the swing, she glanced back over her shoulder at Ethan. The look was brief, but full. Gratitude, fear, something that could someday be trust. In that glance, it was clear. This story wasn't just about a child being found. It was about two adults, each carrying their own broken pieces, slowly realizing they were not the only ones awake in the dark. Inside, the house gleamed. Outside under the maple tree, 3 people were learning how to exist together in a world that hadn't been kind, but might still have room for quiet, fragile hope. Time passed strangely after that. Days didn't heal everything, but they did soften the sharpest edges. At Elena's invitation and Amelia's insistence, Ethan began visiting more often. He learned the rhythms of the house, the way the staff lowered their voices when Amelia entered a room, the way the hallways always felt a little too wide, the way silence seemed to settle in the corners like dust. He noticed something else, too. Outside, in the garden, on the swing, in the patch of grass where they chalked messy moons and stars, Amelia was brighter, freer. She laughed when he pretended Captain Patches could only speak in riddles. She raced him down the stone path. She told him small things, that she liked strawberry yogurt, that loud doors scared her, that she'd once slept in a cardboard box behind a store and pretended it was a spaceship. Inside, she changed. Her shoulders rounded in, her voice dropped to a murmur. She walked instead of ran. During formal meals at the long dining table, she sat stiff-backed in a high chair that looked more decorative than comfortable, Captain Patches hidden in her lap. Sometimes, halfway through a meal, she would quietly slide down, crawl under the table, and stay there, small and shadowed, until someone coaxed her out. Elena tried everything she could think of. Child therapists came to the estate, their voices gentle, their notebooks open. Calming music played in her daughter's room. The walls were repainted in soft colors. Strings of star-shaped lights lined the ceiling. Still, loneliness clung to Amelia like a second skin. Healing, Ethan thought, didn't care about feng shui or designer decor. It cared about connection. One rainy afternoon, the sky low and heavy, Ethan arrived to find the house almost silent. No soft classical music, no distant phone calls. Just the ticking of a grandfather clock and the faint patter of rain against the windows. Elena met him at the door, her smile tired. "She's under the dining room table again," she said quietly. "She's been there since lunch." Ethan nodded, set his bag down, and walked to the dining room without another word. Under the long, polished table, Amelia was curled up on her side, arms wrapped around Captain Patches, eyes open but distant. The tablecloth hung low, making a small tent of shadows around her. "Hey, Moonbeam," he said gently, crouching down. "Rainy days are good for building things, you know." She blinked at him, suspicious. "Like what?" "Like secret houses," he replied. "The kind only very important people get to design. I brought supplies." Outside, the rain eased to a drizzle. Under the big maple in the garden, Ethan spread out his treasures. 2 large cardboard boxes, a roll of duct tape, some old fabric scraps, and a handful of markers he'd borrowed from a craft store clearance bin. Amelia's eyes lit up in a way he hadn't seen inside the mansion walls. "What is it?" she asked, stepping closer, bare toes sinking into the damp grass. "A moon hut," he said. "He said. For a girl who once lived up there, but it only works if she helps decorate." The next hour unfolded quietly but steadily. Ethan cut out windows and a doorway with a pocket knife, careful to show her what he was doing. Amelia drew stars and crescent moons on the sides, her small tongue poking out in concentration. She wrapped bits of lavender from the garden into the fabric, taping them along the roofline. On the front, in big wobbly letters, Ethan wrote, "Amelia's Moon Hut." When they were done, she crawled inside and sat cross-legged, Captain Patches in her lap. The cardboard walls rustled with her movement. "It's small," she said. "But it's yours," Ethan replied. "And in here, you make the rules." At dinner that night, Ethan made one small change. As the staff laid out plates and glasses, he pulled an extra chair up to the table, child-sized, borrowed from a corner of the playroom. He set Captain Patches on it, tucking a napkin under the bear's chin and placing a bread roll on a saucer in front of him. "A special guest needs a proper seat," Ethan announced calmly, as if this were the most normal thing in the world. For a heartbeat, the room was silent. Then Amelia let out a giggle, quick and surprised. She fed her bear imaginary bites and asked if he could have seconds. The stiffness in her posture eased. She swung her legs under the chair, humming to herself between mouthfuls. From the far end of the table, Elena watched them, fingers wrapped around her water glass. There were tears in her eyes, but her smile was steady. "You understand her?" she said later, when they were alone in the kitchen. Amelia having run off to show a housekeeper her moon hut. "Better than I do, better than the specialists." Ethan shrugged, drying a plate with a dish towel. "I had a little sister," he said. "She was quiet, too. The world scared her, but she always felt brave in forts made of blankets and chairs." He set the plate down. Most people see a frightened kid and think rules and programs will fix it. Sometimes, they just need a box, some markers, and someone who doesn't leave. Elena looked at him then. Really looked. Past the worn jacket and the night shift eyes. In a house full of chandeliers and marble, it wasn't the shine that mattered that night. It was cardboard taped together in the garden, a bear with a seat at the table, and the presence of a man who showed up without asking anything in return. Without trying to be, Ethan Rowe had become something rare in their world of polished surfaces and hidden panic. He had become home. The morning was the color of dishwater, flat light pooling in the cracks of the city as Ethan locked his apartment door and headed down the stairs for another night shift. He was halfway across the parking lot when a sleek black sedan rolled to a smooth stop at the curb. The contrast between its polished shine and the chipped paint of his building made the air feel thicker. A man stepped out, tall and composed in a dark suit that looked hand-tailored. His hair was neatly parted, his expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Rowe?" he asked. Ethan nodded slowly. "Yeah." The man extended a card. "I'm Daniel Crane, estate manager for the Hart family." The card felt heavier than it looked. Crane didn't wait for him to read it. "I'll be brief," he went on, words practiced, voice smooth. "You played an important part in Amelia's recovery. The family is grateful." Ethan waited, already hearing the unspoken but. "However," Crane continued, "your ongoing presence at the estate is raising questions. The press has begun to ask why a supermarket security guard with no prior connection to the Harts is spending so much time with their daughter. Perception matters, you understand." "Perception," Ethan repeated quietly. "We'd prefer that you step back now," Crane said, not unkindly. "No drama, no scandal, just distance, for her sake, and frankly, for yours." There was no menace in his tone. That almost made it worse. This was just logistics to him, another problem to tidy out of sight. Ethan studied his face for a long moment, then gave a small nod. "I understand," he said, and he did. He knew how quickly stories could twist in front of cameras, how easily a good deed could be repackaged into suspicion. That night, in his small apartment, he gathered the few things that tied him to the big house on the hill. A sketchbook filled with Amelia's wobbly drawings. A simple wooden puzzle he'd carved for her. A crumpled note in crayon that read, in big earnest letters, "Best friend forever." He smoothed the note out carefully. On his table, Captain Patches sat propped up, fur cleaner now, seams restitched, the missing eye replaced with a mismatched button. Ethan tied a narrow blue ribbon around the bear's neck, fingers lingering for a second. Then he wrote a letter in his neat, slightly cramped handwriting. "Dear Moonbeam, even if I'm far away, you're still the brightest star in my sky. Be brave, be kind, don't stop being exactly who you are. Love, Ethan." In the gray hush of early morning, he walked up to the estate gates one last time. The guard on duty recognized him, hesitated, then accepted the bear and the envelope without comment. Inside, the house would be quiet, the day not yet fully started. He pictured the piano in the foyer, the way sound echoed off the high ceilings. When Elena returned from a meeting that afternoon, the first thing she saw was the bear sitting on the polished piano top, the blue ribbon catching the light. The envelope was propped beside it. She opened the letter and read it once, then again, then a third time, slower, pressing her lips together. In the days that followed, something subtle shifted in the house. The staff said the right things. Therapists still came and went. The cameras outside the gate eventually thinned. But Amelia herself changed in ways that couldn't be measured on a chart. She kept smiling in front of strangers. Polite, practiced smiles that didn't reach her eyes. She answered questions in therapy with careful, small sentences. She slept, but more often with the light on. She stopped running to the door when it opened. She clutched Captain Patches by his new ribbon and took up a quiet post by the tall window in the upstairs hall, watching the driveway as if waiting for someone she couldn't quite name. One night, as Elena tucked the blanket around her, Amelia stared at the ceiling and asked, in a voice thin as thread, "Did Mr. Ethan stop liking me?" The question sliced through Elena more cleanly than any headline ever had. "No," she whispered, smoothing the girl's hair back. "He could never stop liking you." "Then why isn't he here?" Amelia's eyes stayed on the ceiling, tears gathering but not falling. Elena hesitated. "Some people thought it was better this way," she said honestly. Amelia turned her head, just enough to whisper, "Did you?" Elena had no answer she trusted herself to give. Later, she found herself sitting across from her own mother in the dark-paneled study, the walls lined with generations of portraits and awards. "I'm leaving," she said quietly. Her mother didn't look up from the papers on her desk. "Leaving what?" "This," Elena replied, gesturing broadly. "The estate, the constant cameras, the performance of being fine. I want my daughter to be happy, not curated." "You're being emotional," her mother said sharply. "You have a legacy to uphold, a family name, a child to protect." "She doesn't need a legacy," Elena answered, standing. "She needs people who actually see her. He saw her before any of us did." Her mother's lips thinned. "That man is a complication." Elena thought of a cardboard moon hut in a rainy garden, a bear with a chair at the table, a little girl who laughed only when he was near. "No," she said quietly, "he's the only part of this that feels simple." That night, after the house had gone still, Elena packed a small bag, clothes, documents, a dog-eared picture book Amelia loved. She helped her daughter into a jacket, tucked Captain Patches firmly into her arms, and led her down the back stairs and out to the car. No escort, no statement, just a mother and a child slipping away from a life that looked perfect and felt wrong. The city lights blurred by as they drove, Amelia's head eventually falling against the window, Bear clutched tight. When dawn began to gray the sky, Elena pulled up outside a familiar building with cracked steps and faded paint. She stood in the hallway, heart pounding in a way all the flashing cameras in the world had never managed to provoke. Then she raised her hand and knocked. The hallway smelled faintly of old coffee and cleaning supplies, the kind that leave a ghost of lemon behind. The ceiling bulb flickered gently above their heads. Amelia shifted from foot to foot, Captain Patches wedged between her and Elena's side. Behind the door, they could hear faint movement, the scrape of a chair, then footsteps drawing closer. The door opened. Ethan stood there barefoot, hair mussed, still in a faded t-shirt and sweatpants. A mug of coffee steamed in his hand, the scent curling into the hall. For a heartbeat, his face went blank with surprise. Then Amelia burst forward. "Mr. Ethan! Ethan!" she cried, flinging herself into him so hard he barely kept his balance. The mug clattered harmlessly to the floor, coffee splashing his toes. Ethan didn't seem to notice. He dropped the mug, dropped everything, really, to fold his arms around her small frame. He exhaled, a sound that was part laugh, part disbelief. "I missed you," she said into his chest. He bent his head, voice low, roughened with the kind of emotion that sneaks up on you in the spaces between breaths. "I missed you too, Moonbeam." Elena stood in the doorway, one hand resting on the chipped frame, the other holding the duffel. She wasn't dressed like a headline today. No carefully chosen jewelry, no cameras waiting downstairs. Just jeans, a gray cardigan, sneakers. And a look on her face that could only be described as relief edged with fear. "We were hoping you'd still be here," she said softly. Ethan glanced from Amelia to Elena, then stepped aside. "Always," he replied. Later that day, they walked together through a small neighborhood park a few blocks away. There were no marble fountains, no manicured hedges. Just worn swings squeaking in the breeze, kids shouting over a game of tag, a man painting quick portraits under a tree for $5 apiece. Somewhere, a saxophone wandered through a tune that didn't seem in a hurry to end. Amelia ran ahead, Captain Patches in one hand, a crunchy brown leaf in the other. She hopped from crack to crack in the path, announcing each successful jump to no one in particular. Elena and Ethan walked side by side, not quite touching, their steps unconsciously matched. For a while, they just listened. To the children, to the rustle of leaves, to the small, ordinary sounds that families wrap themselves in on quiet afternoons. "I used to dream about her," Elena said eventually, voice barely above the wind. "Almost every night. Sometimes she was calling for me and I couldn't reach her. Sometimes she was just gone." She paused. "I'd wake up crying before I knew why." Ethan didn't interrupt. He let the confession breathe. "When she came back, I thought love would fix it," Elena continued. "That hugs and a safe house and all the things I could buy would make the bad parts disappear." She huffed a faint, humorless laugh. "Turns out love isn't magic. It's more like trying to build furniture without instructions. A lot of pieces, not enough clarity. Takes time, Ethan said, and patience, and maybe someone who actually reads the manual. She turned her head, a small smile tugging at her mouth despite herself. Is that what you are, the one who reads the manual? More like the guy who stares at the pieces and just keeps trying, he replied. But I don't quit easy. Amelia came racing back, cheeks flushed, holding a dandelion puff like it was treasure. Make a wish, she demanded, thrusting it toward Ethan. He knelt to her height, took the fragile stem carefully between his fingers. For a moment, he just looked at it, at the way the tiny seeds clung together, each one waiting for a breath to send it into the unknown. Okay, he said. He closed his eyes, thought of late nights and second chances and a little girl who had slept in a dumpster and was now skipping in the sun. Then he blew, scattering white seeds into the air. What did you wish for? Amelia asked immediately. If I tell you, he said, eyes crinkling, it won't come true. She considered this solemnly. Then I hope you wished for pancakes, she declared. Elena laughed, really laughed, the sound bright and unguarded. A few people on a nearby bench looked up and smiled without knowing why. Sometimes, the way someone laughs is enough to loosen something in everyone around them. They found an empty bench under an old oak, its branches arching overhead like a canopy. Ethan sat in the middle. Amelia curled up against his side, Captain Patches wedged between them like a chaperone. Elena sat on his other side, close enough that her shoulder brushed his whenever either of them breathed a bit deeper. No promises were spoken, no grand plans were laid out. But as the late afternoon light filtered through the leaves, turning the air gold, it didn't feel like the start of something extravagant or dramatic. It felt quieter than that. More real. Not a fairy tale ending. Not yet. Just three people who had been lost in different ways, sitting on a park bench, sharing the same patch of sunlight. Some nights, especially for those who struggle to sleep, it's not the big miracles that keep you going. It's moments like that, small, steady, ordinary, that whisper, almost too softly to hear, you're not alone anymore. Tefan 99. The workshop smelled of sawdust and something softer, lavender oil from a small diffuser Elena had insisted on bringing. Sunlight poured through the tall windows in slanting beams, catching dust motes that drifted lazily in the air. Rows of wooden toys lined the shelves, tiny trains, puzzle animals, crescent-shaped stools, stars carved from reclaimed wood. None of it matched, not really. That was part of the charm. At a long table in the back, Amelia sat cross-legged on a stool, a pair of denim overalls smudged with paint. Her hair was pulled into two lopsided buns she'd done herself. She held up a crayon drawing of a dragon-shaped rocking horse, its tail coiled like a question mark. This one needs sparkles, she announced, eyes shining. Ethan looked up from the piece he was sanding, a half-finished whale with a gentle curve to its back. Sparkles? He echoed. That's a premium feature, gonna cost you at least one cookie. She pretended to think very hard. 2 cookies, Misalta, she bargained. And a hug. He chuckled, setting the sandpaper down. Hard negotiator, deal. The door creaked softly. Elena stepped in, wearing a simple white dress smudged near the hem with paint from some earlier project. Her hair was loose today, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She was holding a thin book to her chest, fingers pressed along the spine like it was something fragile. It's here, she said, a quiet excitement in her voice. The first copies just arrived. Amelia hopped off the stool. The story, she asked. Our story? Elena nodded, offering the book to Ethan. On the cover, in gentle blues and silvers, an illustrator had drawn a man and a little girl standing beneath a full moon. A battered bear sat at their feet, one ear flopped over. Above them, the title, The Girl Who Came Down on a Moonbeam. Ethan traced the small stars printed along the edge. It's beautiful, he murmured. You really did it. We did, Elena corrected softly. You, me, and one very stubborn moonbeam. The book launch wasn't held in a grand hall or a glittering ballroom. Instead, they chose a small neighborhood library tucked between a bakery and a thrift store. A place that always seemed to smell faintly of coffee and paper. Chairs were set up in crooked rows. Handmade star cutouts dangled from string in the reading corner where story time would happen. People trickled in, not donors or paparazzi, just families, neighbors, a few of Ethan's coworkers from the store, kids holding their own well-loved stuffed animals. Amelia sat at the front, legs swinging, Captain Patches resting proudly in her lap. When Elena stepped up to read, her voice trembled only once, on the page where the girl almost didn't get found. When the story ended, there was a moment of quiet, then a soft rustle as people stood, clapping, some with damp eyes they didn't bother to hide. Amelia tugged Ethan and Elena both onto the little platform. The three of them stood side by side, the room full of gentle noise. It wasn't applause for a brand or an empire. It was for survival, for kindness, for the messy, imperfect ways people managed to find each other in the dark. Outside, evening folded over the town like a blanket. Inside, under the library's warm lights, a new chapter in their story began, not with fanfare, but with shared air and shared hope. That night, the little house they now shared glowed softly at the edge of the quiet street. The porch light buzzed, casting a small halo onto the steps, but the main light came from above. The moon hung full and bright in the sky, silver and steady, watching, the way it had on the night everything changed. Ethan sat on the front steps, a mug of tea warming his hands. The day's noise had finally thinned into a gentle hum somewhere far off. Beside him, Elena leaned against his shoulder, her bare feet tucked up, her head resting lightly against him. Her hair tickled his arm each time she breathed out. Inside, the house was small but lived in. A pair of tiny shoes lay crooked by the door. Crayons were scattered across the coffee table beside an open book. On the back porch, unfinished wooden toys waited for another day's work. Nothing matched, but everything belonged. Amelia sat on the top step in front of them, legs folded pretzel style. Captain Patches settled in her lap with his blue ribbon tied in a neat bow. She stared up at the moon with the same quiet intensity she once used to scan alleyways and clinic ceilings. "Do you think she remembers me?" Amelia asked suddenly. "Who?" Ethan said. Though he had a good guess. "The moon," she replied. "From when I was up there, before I came down." Elena smiled softly. "I think she always remembered you," she said. "She just had to wait for the rest of us to catch up." Silence settled again, the good kind. The kind that lets hearts slow down after too many fast nights. After a while, Amelia turned, her voice sleepy at the edges. "We're a real family now, right?" she asked, as if maybe there were a test they hadn't taken yet. Ethan met Elena's eyes over the top of Amelia's head. There was no hesitation this time, no fear of saying too much. "We always were," he answered. Amelia considered this, then nodded once, satisfied in the way children are when something finally clicks into place. She leaned back, resting her head against Ethan's knee, eyelids fluttering. Captain Patches drooped sideways, as if even the bear was tired from so much feeling. Elena's hand found Ethan's, fingers lacing with his. He squeezed gently, grounding himself in the warmth of her palm. The weight of the little girl dozing against him, the soft creak of the old wooden steps beneath them. No headlines, no managers, no performances. Just breath and presence and the quiet, tremulous courage it takes to stay. For people who lie awake at night, haunted by what-ifs and almosts, this is the part of the story that matters most. Not the rescue, not the reveal, not the wealth or the loss. It's this: 3 people under a tired porch light and a faithful moon, choosing each other again and again in the small hours. Up above, the moonlight washed over them. The same light that had once shone on a little girl in a dumpster and a man with a broom who chose not to look away. Now it fell on something whole. Not perfect, not unbreakable, but real and loved and held. No more wandering, no more waiting by windows for footsteps that never come. Just the soft sound of a child's even breathing, the steadiness of shared silence, and the quiet understanding that in a world full of empty spaces, they had become each other's home.